Welcome to the Kellfire Show. I'm Dr. Kelly Barron, and today I'm really excited to have Carissa Karban. Did I say it right?
Karban, yeah.
All right, Karban, because I practiced and then I kind of didn't do it right. But Carissa is a leadership embodiment coach, a co-founder of 2 startups, not 1, but 2. That's very, you're very risky there. I love it. And an alchemist. Oh, I want to find out about that too. After a recent divorce, she went on a 6-month sabbatical around the world, checking off major bucket list items. She has used heartbreak to fuel her expansion and authentic expression. Carissa is passionate about helping people see the systems and stories that hold them back from living their wildest dreams. So welcome, Carissa, and thank you for taking the time out of your day to talk to us and sort of give us your story. I am a little curious about The Alchemist, and because that's near and dear to my heart, and obviously that you went and checked off major bucket list items, because very few people ever do that in their lifetime. So welcome, and why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got to where you are today?
Yeah, thanks, Kelly. I'm so thrilled to be here. Thanks for having me on. You know, it's been quite a wild ride, I will say. I'll start with The Alchemist because that just feels really present. You know, the idea of turning lead into gold is a concept that has really fueled me. Oftentimes, I don't know about you, but earlier in my journey, when really hard experiences would happen, I would kind of question, like, why is this happening to me? And I think I bought into this overarching idea, this story that we're conditioned to believe that if we are successful, if we do life right, quote unquote, then we get to a place where life is easy, there are no more challenges. And I just think that that's kind of a crock, to be honest. The more I experience life, the more I have seen and felt that life is hard, but we do get to choose our hard, right? Do we choose the hard of going after our dreams, taking risks, healing through the trauma that we've experienced in our life? Or do we choose the hard of putting our head in the sand, repressing our emotions, tying our identity and our worth to what everybody expects from us? So we're going to encounter challenges no matter what sort of life we choose. So when it comes to being an alchemist, it's really for me about using the challenges, the hardships as fuel. When we think about, I love to use working out as an example. We think about going to the gym and we're actually breaking our muscles down in order for them to heal and become stronger. And that's exactly how I think of emotional pain and emotional trauma. It can be really tough in the moment, but that's the opportunity, the invitation for us to weave through that difficulty to build more resilience, more clarity about who we are, what we want, what we will tolerate and not tolerate in our lives. And they can all serve, every experience can serve as a breadcrumb on that path to living our most powerful, authentic life.
I love that. I love that thought process of being the alchemist of your own life. That should be on a tote bag and a bumper sticker and like a mantra that we all have. Not where I thought you were going with it, so much better than I thought where you were going with it. So I love that. If that's not a book title yet that you've done, you should make that a book title and run with it. So you've been through a lot of life changes. Can you I'll preface this by saying, most of our audience we've hit midlife, and that whole crock portion of it, we're all told, like, you go to high school, maybe you go to college, then maybe you get married, you probably should, and then you should have children, and that, it's all a fantasy, and that one marriage lasts. And we've been exposed long enough now to know that it's not just one marriage, but that's a goal we all think we have to strive for. And sometimes, especially when you get into this midlife range, you find out that's not the truth, and you're faced with some very uncomfortable decisions, whether you made them or someone made them for you. So I was very interested to read about how you talk about this, and to get your story, your opinion on this part.
Yeah, I think it's so rich, when we start to really wake up to those stories and how we've been living our lives. And I think that some of it can be really hard when we start to realize, oh, I've been living for other people. I haven't been living for myself. That can be sort of a reckoning with ourselves. So my story, I did go through a divorce last year, but it was actually my second divorce. So my first divorce was in my 20s. Exactly to your point, I was kind of checking all these boxes, went to high school, went to college, grew up primarily in the South in the US. So definitely bought into the narrative that I needed to go find my husband. And the joke when I was going to college was that some of the other women's colleges near me, women were going to school to get their MRS degree, right? We were out there hunting for our husbands and expected to start families. And I was really checking all of these boxes because I was fully bought into the narrative that if I check all the boxes correctly, then I'll be happy. So I got married at 22, 3 weeks after I finished my undergrad degree. And by 25, realized, through a lot of series of kind of circular arguments, the same challenges over and over, we weren't making progress. And that was sort of the beginning of my awakening, where I said, well, gosh, I'm checking all these boxes, doing what everyone told me I was supposed to do, and yet I'm miserable inside. So there's got to be a better way. Maybe I have the answers inside of me. And that sort of led to this like huge unraveling that has continued on for the last 15 years. And when I was 30, I met my second husband, and that was a really different relationship that I had with him, because I knew myself more and thought, okay, this is the one that, I was still bought into the narrative that once I get to the right place, I'll find the one. And I married my second husband. We were together for 7 years, and it wasn't completely out of the blue. We'd gone through some hardship. We'd had a lot of really tough things, like the loss of a parent, another parent moving in with us, some financial hardship. I had taken a risk and quit my corporate job. So we'd gone through a lot. But it was a shock, but not a surprise. So the shock came when I thought that he would want to work on saving the marriage. I thought he'd be willing to do more, to go to therapy, for instance. And he instead said, I think we're on different paths, and I don't want to be in this marriage anymore. And that was really, really tough, Kelly, because I thought that, it was the life that I had signed up for. It felt like it was being ripped away from me, kind of the rug being pulled out from under my feet. And while I knew it was a possibility, I truly thought, that we would figure anything out, that we'd move through it. And so there was a lot of pain in that. But for me, where I had gotten to in my journey was, rather than fighting it, rather than begging him to stay, or, trying to contort myself to do whatever he wanted me to do in order to stay in the marriage, I got into a place where I said, everything happens for my highest good. I may not see it right now, but I trust that if I surrender to what is being presented, then I will get through this. I know that I'm strong enough. I know that I'm capable enough. And so my ex and I spent 3 months in a conscious uncoupling. We were able to go through divorce very amicably, separate our assets, separate our dogs, which was really heartbreaking as well.
Yeah.
We don't have any kids. But through that process of really leaning on myself, not seeing my ex as, oh, he's taking my worth away from me, or gosh, who am I going to be without him? I said, I am my own person, and it's really hard that we're going through this experience, but I'm going to be okay on the other end. And so it was through that 3-month process that I said, well, the reason I've been holding on to the corporate job and, the mortgage and kind of these traditional trappings of life was primarily for him, because he wanted that safety and security. So that was really the catalyst for me to say, well, gosh, if he's taking all of that away from me, then I'll one up the stakes, and I'll let go of the job, I'll let go of the house, and kind of go on this nomadic travel adventure around the world that I've always wanted to go on.
That's pretty, that's really, really good insight, if you will. Or not, I shouldn't say insight's the wrong word, but the approach that you took.
Mm.
It is very uncommon. Most of us would freeze, not know what to do, especially if you've been in one marriage for, say, 20, 30 years. Probably your identity is tied to another person. And the thought of simple things, especially as a female, especially if you've had a husband that's a doer, that does all the manly things that we're told are manly, things like, airing your tires, mowing the lawn can seem like, how am I supposed to do that? And for you to just say, you know what, screw it, I'm just going to go. I'm just going to figure it all out. It is really incredible. How did it feel? Were you scared?
I definitely had some moments of, I'll say, like that butterfly in the stomach kind of feeling of, not necessarily in the planning of the trip, but for instance, one of my first big stops was I went to Africa to hike Mount Kilimanjaro.
Whoa.
And so I remember getting to Tanzania and, a very foreign country. I'd never been to Africa before. So it definitely had some moments where I was like, what the heck am I doing here? Can I really do this? But I really was able to lean back on all of the experiences I had in my past of cultivating resilience, cultivating independence, cultivating a problem solving ability. So it's not, oh, I know how to do this. It's, I trust that I'll figure it out.
Yeah, it's not like you took a cruise. It's not like I'm in the South right now, so it's not like you jumped on a cruise to the Bahamas for 2 days or 3 days. You decided, you know what, I'm going to go to a mountain in another country and try to climb this. Did you have a friend that traveled with you, or did you just do it your own?
I did it solo. I had, throughout the 6 months, I had a few days here and there where, one of my best friends and her partner, for instance, I spent a month in New Zealand, and one of my best friends and her partner were going to be there for about 3 days, overlapping with my trip. So we met up for a few days, had some fun together. But for the most part, I was traveling by myself.
Were you, when you sat down and you said, okay, I'm going to dismantle my former life and I'm just going to go and do all these things, were they all on your bucket list, or did you create it post divorce or post knowing that you were going to divorce?
A lot of these were things that I had sort of aspired to do for a long time, sort of, like, oh gosh, hiking Kilimanjaro, wouldn't that be amazing? Going on safari in Africa, that sounds so cool. And so, I have a history of traveling internationally. So I want to be clear, I didn't go from like zero to Africa hiking Kilimanjaro on my first trip, because I think that can be incredibly dysregulating for our nervous system. So I did have a lot of experiences traveling internationally, traveling solo, even domestically or internationally. And so it was really just like, okay, well, I've wanted to do this. I've wanted to get my yoga teacher certification for years, but it was all the things that I said, well, one day when I have the time or I have the money, then I'll go after it and do it. So instead of spacing it out over the course of 10 or 15 years, I just crammed it all into 6 months.
And so that lasted about the 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
And then you came back and started to put roots down, or maybe you didn't put roots down yet. Maybe you're
not quite.
Right. Okay. So you're still on this journey.
I am.
What would you say to a woman who is in a position similar to yours, which all of a sudden is hit with, whether she chose or whether her husband chose to end the marriage, and they'd been together for, 7 years is long. So at least, like a good 5 to 30 years, and hasn't done any of these things, has kind of lived for the marriage, whether she had children, also lived for the children or the fur babies. What would you say to that, that she's just sitting there deer in the headlights, doesn't know what to do, thinks the world has ended?
I feel myself getting emotional just thinking about that. I think first off, I would say I see you. I see the pain, I see the hardship, I see, when we're feeling that deer in the headlights moment, it's understandable, right? There's nothing wrong with being the deer in the headlights, feeling frozen, because the life that we've known has been ripped away from us. So I think first off, I'd say, I see you, and it's valid to be exactly where you are right now. I think oftentimes our society tries to create this message of you need to bounce back super quickly, or you need to move through it, or, you know, find the silver lining right away. And depending on the capacity of your nervous system, right, that we can tap into things like evolutionary biology when we think about when we're faced with a threat. We can go into, we think of fight or flight, and then the freeze state is something that we've been getting more familiar with these days, and understanding that, yeah, when it really feels like our whole identity, our life as we know it has been taken away, there's a huge instinct to freeze. So giving ourselves grace and compassion and understanding for being in that state is really what we need in order to start to thaw that freeze. Because the idea of just moving on directly without feeling those feelings, it's hard to move through it. And so I would say, what you're experiencing is valid, and give yourself permission to feel the hard things. Oftentimes we try to repress or just keep, acting through the emotions, thinking, okay, well, if I just stay in motion, then I don't have to feel it. But those emotions, as we know, will get stored inside of our body. So if we can give ourselves permission to pause, to be still, to feel the heartbreak, to feel how hard it is, to think about starting your life over at that moment, yeah, it can be really hard. And then I would say find support. There are, whether it's people in your direct network or people in support groups or communities online, virtual spaces. I've done a lot of retreats, where I meet like-minded people that I can come together with and connect with on a deep, authentic human level. There are absolutely elements of support out there that can help you get through a really hard situation, because that other societal narrative that we have to pull ourselves up by our bootstraps and do everything by ourselves, especially if as a woman you've been accustomed to taking care of the home, taking care of the kids, probably working, taking care of the husband, all of these things, there can be this story that comes up that we have to get ourselves through it. And we don't need to. We can absolutely receive support from people who love us and people who want to help us get through it.
Did anyone question you? Like, what are you doing? You're running off and you're doing this. You left, like you said, you left your job and the house, the mortgage, and everything. Did anyone say, like, you're being either foolish, selfish, you're not thinking clearly? Did you get that?
Yes. I would say not in spades, because I, over the last several years, have really cultivated a community of people who love me and support me, and who don't necessarily project their judgments or their opinions onto me unless I ask for them. So I'm grateful for that. But I certainly got a lot of people, and this is where I think it was well intentioned, right? It was, oh gosh, like that sounds really scary. So I would get a lot of questions like, well, what are you going to do after? And how are you going to support yourself? And,
Yeah.
it was coming from a place of care, but I absolutely got those questions. A lot of people who said, you're kind of crazy for wanting to do this. And maybe some questions too around like, well, why can't you be happy just playing it safe, or doing the other thing, or playing small? And I lovingly thank people for their opinions, and also know that they're coming from a place of wanting to keep me safe, wanting to keep me happy. But ultimately, I know that nobody can make me as happy as I can make myself. Nobody understands me the way I understand myself. And so I like to take other people's opinions as data, because, for instance, Kelly, if you said to me, you're really crazy for wanting to do this, how could you do this? If there's like a strong voice in my head that says, yeah, this feels wrong, then that's really good data for me to pay attention to. Not because I'm going to listen to your opinion, but because it's going to feed something inside of me that I need to pay attention to. Whereas when I feel really grounded in the course of action I'm taking, and then you say, gosh, Carissa, you're crazy for wanting to do this, it doesn't even affect me. I'm just like, okay, I understand it's not for Kelly, right? She doesn't necessarily want to do it this way, but I feel confident in myself. And so I think that when we can find that grounding within ourselves, And we sometimes need those other people's opinions in order to understand what is the true voice inside of us. But then those opinions and the attacks or how whatever it is. I mean, I think family can be a really hard one,
Yeah.
especially if it's not how we were raised. You know, we get challenged by parents or siblings or people who have known us for a really long time, who we really trust, and we think that they know us best and they know what's best for us. But we have to remember that everybody's human and everyone's doing the best that they can, and nobody has all the answers.
So when you left your job, which obviously had to be a major move because most people, they get into their career and the last thing you want to do is leave that security and that stability. But it's very similar to women. So when you actively choose to do something, whether it is to change careers, leave your job with no career lined up. I've heard of that quite a bit, where women just take the jump because it's not who they are, or it isn't who they are now. It was who they were then. Same thing with a long-term relationship in a marriage, that a woman decides this no longer is a relationship that's viable anymore, without anything major happening, just that it's changed. And you get people who are like, with the career changes or leaving marriages, well, go find yourself. Go take a year or two, go find yourself. And I've heard quite often where women have said, well, I don't need to find myself. That's the whole point. I found myself and I made this major change. Do you ever get any of that, or hear women talking about that, where people are telling them to go find themselves and they're questioning that because they're like, well, who am I supposed to find? This is me.
Yeah, it's so funny you bring that up because I had a lot of people saying that exact thing, like, oh, I hope you find what you're looking for and, go find yourself. And I remember challenging quite a few people to say, I'm found, this isn't something, this isn't a desperate search for who I am. I really feel like I know who I am, and that's why I'm grounded and I'm anchored in these decisions. And so that was true. And I will say that having gone on the sabbatical and even living the life I live today, where I'm, have two startups, doing the entrepreneur thing, I have a new partnership that I'm in, even all of these things, because I'm living on my growth edge. I'm at that growth edge of, living my heart out loud, living my most authentic life. I have continued to find more aspects of myself. So it wasn't necessarily that I was lost and I needed to find myself, but the more I shed the traditional narratives, the roles that I've played, the masks that I've worn, the more I find parts of myself. I don't know if you're familiar with internal family systems and, doing this parts work where we have all these different aspects of ourselves that we've maybe pushed into the shadow or we've invalidated over the course of time. And so while I am fully authentic, I haven't necessarily met all parts of myself. And so the course of these travels, I've had challenges, I've had exhilarating experiences, I've had deep moments of joy and gratitude that have allowed new parts of myself to awaken. So I have found more of myself on this journey.
I really like that. And I think that's so true. I think, you can get to this stage in life and there's still so much more growth that needs to happen. And to say that we've been through a phase of our life, whether it's children, careers, both, a marriage, a high profile, or just a job that you thought you were destined to do, you went to school with, and then that growth is done. So now you're just, now it's just finishing, getting old, and then pass on from this earth. And I think especially for women, as we get into, perimenopause, menopause, your hormones are going crazy, your brain is fogginess, people tend to say, oh, she's doing this, or she's like this, or she's making these drastic changes because her hormones, she's not right. And this will pass. And I ultimately take the opposite stance on that, and it sounds like you do the same, that we continue to grow as we start shedding the need to take care of others and live for others or put others first, and we start focusing now. on ourselves, there's so many versions, like you said, of yourself that you've either suppressed, never met, or are continuing to grow into this person that ultimately I hope you can fall in love with. And that should be your marriage, your last marriage. It's your marriage with yourself. So now you've taken the big leap. Where else did you travel? Tell us that, because we got New Zealand and we've got Africa. You didn't go on the cruise to the Bahamas. So where'd you go?
Yeah, so I went to Africa first. Well, I stopped in Canada to see some family and then went to Africa. I spent a couple months in Guatemala, got my
Wow.
yoga teacher certification down there at a beautiful place, and then went to New Zealand for a month, went to Australia, and went to Hawaii as well.
Well, you went everywhere.
I did, and I planned it strategically because I spent the last 5 years in Colorado and I had really harsh winters. I was living on the side of a mountain, the north side of a mountain, had about 8 months of snow. And so last year I strategically planned it so that I wouldn't have to have winter. So I went to the Southern Hemisphere in January, drove a camper van around New Zealand for a month, and then followed my favorite musician to a music festival in Australia. And
That's cool.
yeah, did all kinds of things. And it was really fun and beautiful. And then actually met my new partner in Hawaii and decided, after that I was going to move to Hawaii because I didn't know. So many people asked me, well, where are you going to land after all this is over? And I said, I'm not sure, but when it's time to know, the answer will be revealed. And I met my partner, and within a week we knew, like, okay, this is it. So I'm moving to Hawaii. So I recently moved to Hawaii, but only spent a month there and then went back to Guatemala for a training. And now he and I are on a U.S. road trip. We've been road tripping for about 2 months, and we have a couple more months to go. And we're traveling all around the U.S. With my dog and meeting my friends and family, his friends and family, and kind of doing like a couple's debut road show, if you will.
That's insane in a good way. That's you know, your life is going to be so full of stories.
Mm,
Your life is what you've decided to make of it,
hmm.
and it's an adventure. And I'm sure at some point that you'll keep your feet in one place for a little bit, but why not? But why just get the house and just stay there for the rest of your life? Why not just chase your dreams? And we're only on this planet for one life, and that's it, and it could end at any time. I think that's really, really cool. There'll be women, and I'm sure you felt this too, that will feel like this is all great, and I'm not like her,
Hmm.
or that's not how I am, and what am I going to do? I'm all on my own right now, and I'm pretty sure this is it. And they don't have hope. They don't have hope for new jobs because they think, well, no one's going to hire me at this age,
Hmm.
or a new relationship because they're going to say no one's going to fall in love with me at this age, and they're just kind of withering. What advice would you give to them?
Mm. I think that's so beautiful because I think you're absolutely right. I think in those moments of hardship, it can be really hard to see the light at the end of the tunnel. And, I think part of it goes back to feel that, if that's your truth in this moment, let it be your truth, because I'm not in the business of gaslighting people into saying like, oh, just move forward. The grass is always greener, something good will happen. I think for me, it's really the mindset shift of what is this experience trying to teach me? What can I learn? Going back to alchemy, where we started this
Right.
conversation, really thinking about how can I turn this lead experience into not, convert it completely into gold, and not
Right.
not not think about, oh, I'm so happy this happened, because that may or may not happen. Um, but maybe like, where can I find a vein of gold in the lead? Maybe one thing, for instance, that I have really loved is I love my alone time. And I never had as much alone time. In my marriage, I went through depression and spent a lot of time alone. For those reasons, went through some really dark times, but coming back into this joyful existence and being able to have the time. You think about, like you were saying, women who have constantly been living for kids, for a husband, for a job. If you find yourself with, kind of some emptiness in the calendar, take yourself on a date, go for a walk in the woods, just sit and notice how beautiful the sunshine is. We're constantly thinking of what we need to do, but giving ourselves permission to be and just to sit, maybe pick up that book you've been wanting to read. I don't think that the answer for everyone is to go travel the world or do some big adventure. It's really about when we get quiet and we get still, that's when the answer from our heart can come forward. In the quietness, something that we've been so busy, doing and hustling and working, there might be desires inside of us that haven't had time to come out because we've been so busy living for other people. So I would say, see if you can enjoy the quiet and the stillness and allow yourself to feel, get curious about, what the experience is trying to teach you, or, what desire you might have that has been aching to come forward.
That's really good. I agree with that. I agree with the quietness and just and being able. It's so hard to look within yourself. And when people say that, you go, "What are you talking about? Look within myself. How could I even do that?" But if you just sit with yourself for a little bit and allow yourself to dream, and then, a lot of people won't take a jump on the dream. They'll live the dream, they'll let it sit out there, and they won't do it. And it's because the dream typically is really uncomfortable to achieve. There's going to be something uncomfortable. And I've always said this is how I've tried to live my life, accidentally, but is to get comfortable being uncomfortable and to chase something for me. And again, this is not for everyone, but I do think when people start to, in whatever degree of uncomfortable is to you, but I try to put myself into uncomfortable things that I'm almost scared to death to do. And it could be public speaking, which I'm horribly scared to do. And here I am. But when I do that, whether I succeed or fail, you have to give yourself permission to succeed or fail. I feel like I just learned something tremendous about myself, that something I probably would never have done. Or like parallel parking to me was the craziest thing in the world. I failed my driver's test twice on it. There was just, I've never parallel parked until I'm 54. I think it was about a year ago. I was like, I got a parallel park, or I was in like the city, and I was just sweating. I was freaking out, and I parallel parked. Ugly, very ugly parallel park, but I did it, and I didn't hit anybody or a curb. And I was like, well, you look at you go. You're capable of anything now. And I think sometimes that kind of coincides with dreams. Like you have to allow yourself to think that you can go after that dream, and you might not always get it. And that's okay, because usually that leads to something else. But also sitting quietly with yourself and consciously choosing that, it's okay to go after something.
Yeah, I love that. I love the example. Congratulations on parallel parking.
I know,
It's definitely a challenge. So,
everywhere now, either side of the street.
wow, look at you go.
Still working on backing up into a parking space. It freaks me out, but the parallel parking, no problem.
No, that's amazing. See, and like, look at that, right? This thing that you were so afraid of, now by facing the fear, by confronting it, now it's not that scary anymore. And now you feel stronger, you feel more resilient. And I think that's such a beautiful example. So I appreciate you sharing. I think that's the thing. I think that's how I think about setting goals these days. It's not that I'm supposed to achieve the goal or the dream that I have. It's that if I feel the desire in my heart, it means that's the next step that I take, is in that direction. So for instance, if you desire to travel the world and be a photographer, we'll use that. But you've never picked up a camera and you've never been out of the country, you can start with baby steps, right? You don't have to completely flip your life upside down and go do this thing that you dream of, but maybe buy a camera and start playing around with it in your neighborhood, or, taking pictures of friends or whatever it is. There are so many small steps we can take because, yeah, to your point, maybe you're never meant to travel the world and be a photographer, but maybe there's a lucrative photography business that's waiting for you because you fall in love with it. And so it's not about attaching to the outcome of the dream or the goal. It's just about saying, oh, that's the breadcrumb for the next step that I'm supposed to take in that direction. And then when we slow down and we give ourselves that permission, to find stillness, we take the step and then we reassess. What new information have I gotten? To your point, right? If you had tried parallel parking and it had gone horribly wrong, maybe you would have said, I'm not meant to parallel park in this lifetime. And then you also make peace with it that way by saying, it's just not for me. Instead of it hanging over you as something you think you should do or want to do, by taking a step in that direction, you get more information and more data that says, okay, push through it and then develop your strength and resilience that way. Or, nope, that's definitely not for me, but now I don't have to wonder.
Right. And I think, and I'm sure you've experienced this a lot. Obviously, you did on your journey. Is that you may open a door. We'll call it a little tiny door. You open the door and you think you're going in this direction, but that door isn't exactly what you thought that door was. You had to do it. You had to open it, but it led you to a different door over here. And right, you could have thought, I'm going to travel the world and be a photographer, and you could have picked up the camera and started making plans to travel and found out, no, I'm better at fashion, but I wouldn't have known if I hadn't met this other person with a camera and so on and so forth.
Exactly.
And I think people could learn a lot from what you did with your life, and just in terms of, I'm just going to do it and see what happens. I've got a plan, but the plan is always fluid if you allow yourself to let it be fluid.
It took me a long time to get there. I will say I lived many, many years wanting to be in control of my life, thinking that success was achieving the goals that I set out for. I was very determined, very controlling, very in my masculine energy. And over the last 5 years specifically, as I've really intentionally been softening and healing my relationship with my feminine side and kind of stepping into this rewilding era, that is where I have been able to surrender and say, you know what? There are forces at play that are bigger than my mind, than my individual, created mind. And so I'm going to take the steps that are mine to take, and then I'm going to surrender. I'm going to flow, because I've seen that so often when things don't go according to my plan, I end up in a much better place that I couldn't have imagined. And so I no longer try to control the outcome or hold on to it. I just say, I'm going to do what's mine to do. But for me, the most important thing is to be present in my life. I lived so many years constantly thinking about the future that my life was truly sort of passing me by, and I had to dismantle the barriers that I had for moving away from the present moment. And the more I've been able to be present with myself and be present in the moment, the more attuned I've become to my intuition, to the data that I'm taking in, to say, okay, is this aligned or is this not aligned? And that's made a huge difference.
Well, Carissa, I want to thank you so much for sharing. I mean, it takes a lot to tell your story. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I'm sure everyone's always like, oh, they're just hanging on listening to what you've done. And I want to do that. But I mean, you lived it, and that you lived a very, you dropped it all and just went for it. And I appreciate that. I know my listeners appreciate you sharing that story. And it is inspirational. There's so much to be taken from your journey that, we can look at and say, okay, look, she survived. She did it, and she's still here. But it's a good lesson, and it's a good lesson at this point in folks' life, is to understand, you've reached midlife. That means you have a whole other half of your life to live, and you might as well go do the things and dream and reinvent yourself if you need to, if that's what feels right to you. So I do appreciate you sharing your story with me. I am pretty excited to find out what happens next in your journey. How many more months do you have traveling? Unknown?
2 to 4, TBD.
Yeah. So, having said that, can folks follow you on social media to kind of get an update, if you will? Where would they look?
Absolutely. You can find me most on Instagram, which I feel like puts me definitively in an age range as opposed to Facebook or TikTok. But I hang out on Instagram most of the time at wild_moss_. So yeah, I would love to connect. And if anybody hearing this, resonates with my journey and you want to connect and you just want an ear to listen, I'm happy to connect, happy to inspire if I can, but I'm truly just living it. And so I think the biggest inspiration is just, if I can do it, you can do it. Whatever your heart desires. And if you just need a cheerleader in your corner saying, I see you and you can absolutely go for it, then reach out. Would love to connect.
Great. Do you have a website too?
I do actually. Healcollective.me is one of the startups websites.
All right, so we'll put your Instagram and your website in the show notes so y'all can find. Oh, I'm not even Southern. I'm from New York. Did you hear that though? You all can find her. Charleston. I've been in Charleston for 11 years and now I'm a native. But I always ask my guests before we go for this a theme song, if you will, for your journey. And if you could tell us that, I will put it on the Kellfire Show playlist on Spotify.
Yeah, I would say I have gone through a mixed relationship with Miley Cyrus, but it's got to be Flowers. I really
Hey.
love that song. It really helped empower me last summer, especially when I was going through my divorce. And I went through a couple of different songs, kind of the heartbreak, and the Dance by Garth Brooks helped me get through. And then coming into Flowers was just a really empowering song for me.
All right, that's not on the list, so I'll get it on. And then I have one personal question I want to know. So who is the favorite artist / band that you went and saw in Australia?
So his name is John Butler. I've been a fan of his for about 15 years. He lives in Australia, tours the US frequently. I've seen him about 6 different times in 3 different countries.
Oh wow.
Yeah, I'm a little bit of a fangirl, but I love him. He's a really conscious musician, really speaks for the rights of others, and he's a big activist back home in Australia. And so I went to the Australian Outback to a music festival to see him perform in his
How
hometown.
cool is that? How cool is that? I think that's awesome. The best I'm going to do is get to like Greensboro, North Carolina to a concert. And so no Australia, but
Hey,
that's
Greensboro,
great.
I'm sure has great venues.
Yes.
I think it's all about doing what makes you happy and finding the bands or the shows or the experiences that really light you up. And I just happen to be very hungry for big experiences, I guess.
No, I love it. Well, Carissa, thank you so much for coming on. Um, and thank you everyone for listening to Carissa's story. And I hope, little pieces of it either resonated with you or inspire you. And you can reach out and follow her on Instagram, as I will be, because I'm so curious where the rest of this goes. But thank you all for listening and watching, and we will talk soon.